The moment someone demands a price for your piece is often the moment they reveal how little they understand the person standing in front of them. Saturday mornings always arrived early for Rachel Carter. Before sunrise painted the storefront windows with warm shades of gold, she had already unlocked Carter's Corner Market, switched on the lights, and started brewing fresh coffee for the first customers of the day. The little neighborhood shop sat at the edge of Maple Ridge, a quiet American town where regulars greeted one another by name and nobody ever left without sharing a story. Rachel preferred life that way. She stocked every shelf herself, arranged fresh fruit with careful precision, and greeted every customer with the same gentle smile that never seemed forced. Dressed in faded blue jeans, comfortable work boots, and a simple gray sweatshirt, she looked exactly like the hard-working owner everyone believed her to be. Few people noticed the remarkable discipline hidden beneath her ordinary routine. Every label lined up perfectly. Every emergency exit remained clear. Every storage box rested exactly where it belonged. Years of habit had quietly shaped every movement she made. By 8 o'clock, the market buzzed with familiar voices. An elderly veteran picked up his morning newspaper. A young mother searched for pancake syrup while her daughter admired colorful balloons tied near the checkout counter. A local mechanic laughed with the mail carrier over steaming cups of coffee. It was the kind of peaceful morning that made small towns feel timeless. Then the front door opened, and the atmosphere shifted before a single word was spoken. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside with slow confidence. Officer Daniel Harper entered first while Officer Travis Cole followed several steps behind, scanning the store with practiced eyes. Rachel greeted them exactly as she greeted everyone else. She wished them a good morning, offered fresh coffee, and asked whether they needed help finding anything. Harper smiled politely, but there was something unusually deliberate about the expression. Instead of answering her question, he rested one hand lightly on the checkout counter and remarked that successful businesses usually appreciated the people who kept the community safe. Rachel simply nodded, waiting patiently for him to continue. Harper explained that maintaining strong relationships with local law enforcement could make life much easier for business owners. He suggested that some merchants voluntarily contributed to neighborhood support efforts because they understood the value of cooperation. Rachel listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped speaking, she calmly asked where those contributions were officially recorded. For the first time, Harper hesitated. Cole exchanged a quick glance with his partner before replying that not every arrangement appeared on paper. The customers nearby quietly looked at one another. No one spoke. Rachel folded a clean towel beside the register, thanked the officers for explaining their position, and answered in the same steady voice she had used from the beginning of the conversation. She said her business supported the community by paying every legal obligation, helping local families whenever possible, and treating every customer with respect. She believed that was the only contribution any honest business should ever be expected to make. Harper's smile slowly disappeared. He leaned slightly closer and suggested that refusing friendly advice sometimes created unnecessary complications. Rachel met his eyes without raising her voice or changing her expression. She replied that doing the right thing occasionally required accepting uncomfortable conversations, but principles were not meant to change whenever pressure appeared. Behind the register, partly hidden beside an old coffee grinder, rested a worn challenge coin and a wooden picture frame turned just enough to keep its photograph out of sight. Rachel briefly adjusted both items before looking back at the officers with quiet confidence. Outside, another ordinary Saturday morning continued beneath bright blue skies, yet inside the little neighborhood market, an invisible line had already been crossed, and none of the people standing there realized they were only moments away from discovering that the quiet woman behind the counter carried a story far greater than anyone had imagined. Officer Daniel Harper allowed the silence to settle across Carter's Corner Market before speaking again, as though he believed quiet pressure could accomplish what direct words had not. He slowly looked around the store, studying the neatly organized shelves, the polished hardwood floor, and the steady flow of customers who suddenly found themselves pretending to browse while carefully listening to every sentence. Officer Travis Cole folded his arms beside the entrance, watching each person who entered with measured attention. Rachel Carter remained behind the register, calmly ringing up a loaf of bread for the elderly veteran before thanking him for stopping by and wishing him a pleasant weekend. Her voice never changed. Her smile never faded. The ordinary rhythm of the store continued because she refused to surrender it to fear. Harper leaned lightly against the counter once more and remarked that businesses often discovered how valuable good relationships could become when unexpected inspections, permit reviews, or anonymous complaints suddenly appeared. Rachel quietly placed the customer's receipt into his hand before looking back at the officer. She answered that every inspection completed at her market had always reflected honest work, careful preparation, and respect for the law. She believed those were the strongest protections any business owner could have. The response was polite, yet it carried a confidence that Harper had not expected. Cole slowly walked toward one of the refrigerated cases, pretending to examine the drinks inside while his eyes wandered across the small details surrounding the checkout area. He noticed the challenge coin resting beside the old coffee grinder. Its edges were worn smooth from years of handling, but the unfamiliar insignia engraved across its surface caught his attention. Before he could study it more closely, Rachel calmly placed a stack of grocery receipts over part of the coin while organizing paperwork, never appearing protective, only organized. Near the register stood a wooden picture frame turned slightly away from customers. From where Cole stood, only the corner of a formal military photograph could be seen, revealing several decorated uniforms but hiding every face. None of it meant anything to him, yet something about the display refused to leave his thoughts. The retired teacher quietly stepped forward to pay for a carton of milk, offering Rachel an encouraging smile before leaving without saying a word. The young mother gathered her daughter and headed toward the front door, glancing back one final time with visible concern. Even the familiar laughter that normally filled the little market had disappeared beneath an uneasy stillness. Harper noticed the reactions and seemed almost satisfied by the discomfort spreading through the room. He suggested that Rachel still had time to reconsider before making life unnecessarily difficult for herself. Rachel folded another clean towel, adjusted the coffee pot warming on the counter, and answered with the same steady voice that had guided every conversation since sunrise. She explained that difficult moments often revealed what people truly believed, and she had spent her entire life trying to ensure that her principles remained stronger than outside pressure. Harper studied her face carefully, searching for uncertainty, frustration, or hesitation. He found none. Outside the front windows, two dark sport utility vehicles quietly turned onto the street before disappearing beyond the next intersection. Rachel noticed them for only an instant before returning her attention to the customer standing in front of her. No one else inside the market seemed to recognize the significance of their brief appearance. The morning continued moving forward 1 minute at a time, but beneath the calm surface, invisible pieces were quietly falling into place, and although the officers believed they still controlled the conversation, the first signs of a far larger story had already begun to emerge beyond anything they could possibly imagine. Officer Daniel Harper watched Rachel Carter with growing frustration because every strategy he expected to work seemed to dissolve against her steady composure. She did not argue. She did not negotiate. She simply continued, serving every customer who walked through the front door with the same quiet professionalism that had defined the entire morning. An elderly couple purchased fresh vegetables, while Rachel carefully wrapped their groceries and thanked them for supporting local businesses. A delivery driver stopped briefly for coffee before returning to his truck. Life inside Carter's Corner Market continued almost normally, yet beneath the familiar routine every person sensed that something important was unfolding. Officer Travis Cole wandered slowly toward a small display near the back wall where framed community photographs hung beside certificates recognizing local volunteer programs. One photograph immediately caught his attention. Rachel stood among a group of veterans during a Memorial Day ceremony, but she was dressed only in ordinary civilian clothing, while everyone around her wore military uniforms. What surprised him even more was the unmistakable respect reflected in the expressions of the uniformed service members standing beside her. They were not merely posing for a picture. They appeared to be honoring her. Before Cole could study the photograph longer, an older man wearing a faded military cap entered the store carrying an empty coffee thermos. His face brightened the moment he saw Rachel. He thanked her for arranging next week's charity breakfast supporting military families, and remarked that nobody organized an event with greater attention to detail. Rachel smiled warmly, filled his thermos without charging him, and reminded him to arrive early because several visiting service members would be attending. The veteran nodded with quiet appreciation before noticing the two officers standing nearby. His smile faded slightly, but he chose not to ask questions. Instead, he wished Rachel a pleasant day and left the market. Harper noticed the exchange but dismissed it as another example of a friendly small-town relationship. Rachel returned to the register and quietly straightened the worn challenge coin resting beside the old coffee grinder. Sunlight passed through the front windows, briefly reflecting across the engraved surface before disappearing again. Cole found himself staring at the unfamiliar insignia once more. It did not resemble any local police organization or veterans association he recognized. Nearby, the wooden picture frame shifted slightly as Rachel organized a stack of receipts, revealing a little more of the photograph hidden inside. He could now see several highly decorated military officers standing beside a woman whose face remained partly covered by the frame itself. Something about the image continued to bother him, although he could not explain why. Outside, the quiet sound of large engines drifted faintly through the open doorway. Rachel looked toward the street for only a brief second before calmly returning her attention to a customer purchasing groceries for the weekend. Harper followed her glance but saw only ordinary traffic moving through Maple Ridge. Whatever had captured Rachel's attention remained invisible to him. The tension inside the market slowly deepened, not because anyone raised a voice, but because every unanswered question seemed to create another. The customers sensed that Rachel knew far more than she was willing to say, while the officers remained convinced they still controlled the conversation. Neither side realized that the smallest clues scattered throughout the little grocery store had already begun forming a picture that would soon become impossible for anyone to ignore, and when the truth finally revealed itself, every quiet detail from that ordinary Saturday morning would suddenly make perfect sense. The uneasy quiet inside Carter's Corner Market lingered as the last customer stepped away from the register, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerators and the steady ticking of the clock above the entrance. Officer Daniel Harper looked toward Rachel Carter with growing confidence, believing that the shrinking crowd had finally given him the advantage. He calmly explained that this was the perfect opportunity to resolve the misunderstanding before unnecessary complications reached people who cared about the future of the little neighborhood store. Rachel folded another paper grocery bag with deliberate care before placing it neatly beneath the counter. She thanked him for his concern and replied that honest businesses rarely needed to fear honest processes. Harper answered with a restrained smile, suggesting that reality often worked differently from ideals. Rachel simply nodded. She had heard similar arguments before, and they no longer carried the power to unsettle her. Officer Travis Cole continued studying the market, noticing details that became stranger the longer he looked. Every emergency supply rested in exactly the same position. Every inventory clipboard used identical handwriting. Even the schedule posted beside the employee entrance listed every task with remarkable precision. It looked less like a small grocery store and more like an operation maintained according to disciplined procedures. His attention drifted once again toward the wooden picture frame beside the register. As sunlight shifted through the front windows, the reflection faded just enough for him to recognize several rows of military decorations on the uniforms inside the photograph, although Rachel's face remained partially hidden behind the edge of the frame. Before he could step closer, Rachel calmly moved a basket of fresh apples, unintentionally returning the frame to its original angle. At that same moment, the store telephone rang. Rachel answered immediately with the same warm professionalism she offered every customer. She listened quietly for several seconds before replying that everything was proceeding exactly as scheduled. She confirmed the location, thanked the caller for the update, and gently returned the receiver to its cradle. Harper casually asked whether she was expecting someone important. Rachel smiled politely and answered that she always expected people who believed in serving their community. The response sounded simple, yet it revealed nothing. Outside, another pair of dark sport utility vehicles entered Maple Ridge, at an unhurried pace before turning toward the downtown district. Their appearance lasted only a moment, but Rachel glanced at the wall clock almost instinctively before continuing to organize paperwork. Cole noticed both movements. He did not know why, but he began feeling that the morning was following a schedule understood by Rachel alone. An elderly woman entered the market carrying an empty reusable shopping bag. Rachel immediately greeted her by name, helped her select several groceries, and quietly slipped an extra loaf of bread into the bag after learning that her grandson had unexpectedly come home from college for the weekend. The woman thanked her with genuine affection before leaving. Harper watched the exchange in thoughtful silence. The kindness appeared effortless, as though Rachel measured success not by profit but by the people walking through her front door. Still, he remained convinced that steady confidence would eventually give way under continued pressure. He reminded Rachel that opportunities to settle disagreements peacefully did not last forever. Rachel met his eyes with calm certainty and replied that truth had never depended upon deadlines because it arrived precisely when it was supposed to. Beyond the front windows, the distant sound of approaching engines grew slightly louder before fading once again into the ordinary rhythm of the town. Inside the market, every unanswered question continued gathering quiet weight, and although no one standing there fully understood it yet, the final pieces of an extraordinary revelation were steadily moving into place with the quiet precision of a plan set in motion long before the first police cruiser had ever entered the parking lot. The peaceful rhythm of Carter's Corner Market continued for only a few more minutes before a low rumble echoed through the streets outside. At first, no one inside paid much attention. Delivery trucks passed through Maple Ridge every weekend, and the sound blended naturally into the familiar life of the town. Rachel Carter, however, glanced toward the front window for barely a second before returning to the register with the same calm expression she had worn all morning. She did not appear surprised. She simply checked the time on the clock above the entrance, straightened the stack of grocery receipts beside the old coffee grinder, and quietly refilled the coffee station for the customers who remained inside. Officer Daniel Harper noticed the brief glance toward the window but dismissed it as ordinary curiosity. Convinced that the conversation was finally reaching its conclusion, he stepped closer to the counter and calmly suggested that refusing practical advice often forced situations to become far more complicated than necessary. Rachel looked at him with steady eyes and answered that complicated situations usually became much simpler whenever everyone chose to follow the same rules. Her response contained neither sarcasm nor defiance. It sounded like a simple observation, yet Harper found himself unable to answer immediately. Officer Travis Cole drifted toward the front entrance and casually looked through the glass doors. Across the street, two dark sport utility vehicles had quietly parked near the town square. Their windows remained heavily tinted, and no markings identified the agency they belonged to. A few pedestrians glanced toward the vehicles before continuing with their morning. Nothing about the scene appeared dramatic, yet something about the disciplined positioning of the vehicles felt deliberate. Cole returned his attention to the store without mentioning what he had seen. An elderly veteran entered once again, this time carrying several folders beneath one arm. The moment Rachel noticed him, she smiled warmly and asked whether everything was ready for the afternoon community event. The veteran nodded and replied that volunteers had nearly finished setting up the booths in the park. He thanked Rachel for coordinating every detail, adding that people from several military organizations had already arrived in town. Harper quietly listened to the exchange while pretending not to. Rachel wished the veteran good luck and reminded him that every family attending deserved to feel welcome. The older man smiled respectfully before leaving the market once again. As the door closed behind him, Harper's attention shifted toward the wooden picture frame resting beside the register. The angle had changed just enough to reveal part of a formal military ceremony. Several highly decorated officers stood in perfect formation, while a woman wearing a service uniform remained partly hidden behind the edge of the frame. Before he could take a closer look, Rachel calmly moved a grocery basket onto the counter, once again covering part of the photograph without appearing to notice. At almost the same moment, the worn challenge coin beside the coffee grinder caught another beam of sunlight, its unfamiliar insignia reflecting briefly across the polished countertop. Outside, One of the dark vehicles slowly opened its rear passenger door. A sharply dressed senior military officer stepped onto the sidewalk, followed by two uniformed personnel who remained several respectful steps behind. None of the customers inside the market recognized them, but Rachel quietly exhaled, adjusted the sleeves of her gray sweatshirt, and returned to helping a young customer choose a candy bar near the register. She never hurried. She never looked anxious. She simply continued serving everyone around her with quiet confidence. The approaching footsteps outside grew steadily closer until they finally stopped just beyond the front door, and although no one inside Carter's Corner Market understood it yet, the ordinary morning that had begun with subtle pressure was only seconds away from revealing a truth capable of changing every assumption made since the first police cruiser arrived. The front door opened with a soft chime, and every conversation inside Carter's Corner Market came to an immediate stop. A distinguished military officer stepped inside with calm, deliberate confidence, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform that reflected decades of disciplined service. Two additional uniformed personnel remained near the entrance, respectfully allowing the senior officer to continue alone. Officer Daniel Harper instinctively straightened his posture, uncertain whether the visitor had arrived by coincidence or for a specific purpose. Rachel Carter looked up from the register, and for the first time that morning, her warm smile carried unmistakable familiarity. The officer approached the counter, stopped a respectful distance away, and spoke with quiet professionalism. "Good morning, ma'am," Rachel answered with the same calm respect before both exchanged a crisp military salute executed with flawless precision. The movement lasted only a moment, yet it transformed the atmosphere inside the little market more completely than any argument could have. Every customer stared in complete silence. Harper looked from Rachel to the visiting officer, struggling to understand what he had just witnessed. The officer lowered his hand and addressed her formally as Commander Rachel Carter before thanking her for agreeing to support the afternoon Veterans Outreach Program during her personal leave. The words seemed to freeze time itself. Officer Travis Cole slowly turned toward the wooden picture frame beside the register. For the first time, the sunlight revealed the entire photograph. Rachel stood proudly in military uniform surrounded by highly decorated leaders, her confident posture matching the quiet discipline she had displayed throughout the morning. The worn challenge coin resting beside the coffee grinder suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. It had never been a decoration. It represented years of distinguished service earned through commitment and sacrifice. The senior officer introduced himself as Colonel Benjamin Hayes and explained that he had served alongside Commander Carter during several demanding assignments where exceptional leadership, sound judgment, and unwavering professionalism had earned the respect of everyone under her command. Rachel responded modestly, thanking him for the generous words before quickly redirecting the conversation toward the community event waiting outside. She showed no interest in discussing her own accomplishments. Several customers exchanged astonished glances. The elderly veteran who had visited earlier had clearly known exactly who she was all along. Harper finally found his voice and politely asked whether Rachel had truly served as a Delta Force commander. Rachel answered with complete humility. She explained that service had been one chapter of her life, but caring for her hometown and serving her neighbors remained equally important responsibilities. A title, she quietly added, never defined the character of the person wearing it. Colonel Hayes smiled and remarked that this was precisely why so many people continued, trusting her leadership long after leaving active assignments together. Through the front windows, additional military personnel could now be seen preparing tables for the Veterans Outreach event in the nearby town square. Families gathered along the sidewalks while volunteers unloaded supplies from the parked vehicles with calm efficiency. Harper slowly lowered his eyes, replaying every conversation that had taken place inside the market since the beginning of the morning. Rachel had never argued, never boasted, and never revealed her remarkable background to gain an advantage. She had simply remained faithful to her principles from beginning to end. As she returned to helping a customer choose fresh produce with the same kindness she had shown all day, everyone inside Carter's Corner Market quietly realized that genuine authority rarely announced itself because the strongest leaders allowed their character to speak long before anyone ever discovered the extraordinary life hidden behind an ordinary smile. The remarkable silence inside Carter's corner market slowly gave way to quiet conversation, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every customer who had witnessed the unexpected exchange now looked at Rachel Carter with new understanding. Yet she behaved exactly as she had before the military officer arrived. She greeted an elderly couple with a warm smile, carried a heavy grocery bag to a waiting vehicle, and thanked a young volunteer for helping refill the coffee station. Her routine never changed because her character had never depended upon whether people recognized her accomplishments. Colonel Benjamin Hayes watched the scene with quiet admiration before turning toward Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Travis Cole. He thanked both officers for remaining at the market and reminded them that every profession built public confidence through fairness, professionalism, and respect. His words carried no accusation. They reflected the same calm discipline that Rachel herself had demonstrated throughout the morning. Harper lowered his eyes for a moment, replaying every conversation since he first stepped through the front door. He realized that Rachel had never challenged his authority, never attempted to embarrass him, and never revealed her military background to gain an advantage. She had relied only on honesty, patience, and unwavering self-control. Those qualities unsettled him far more than any confrontation ever could. Cole quietly admitted that the challenge coin and the photograph had caught his attention long before the truth became clear. Colonel Hayes smiled and explained that remarkable people often left quiet clues behind because they had no desire to advertise their achievements. The greatest leaders, he said, preferred being known for how they treated people rather than for the titles they had earned. Nearby, the elderly veteran returned carrying several event badges and greeted Rachel with visible respect. He thanked her for years of supporting military families without ever asking for recognition in return. Rachel accepted the compliment with a modest smile and quickly redirected the conversation toward the volunteers preparing the afternoon outreach program. She reminded everyone that the event existed to honor those who served, not to celebrate any single individual. Several customers exchanged thoughtful smiles. The retired teacher softly remarked that genuine humility was impossible to imitate because it appeared naturally in every small decision. Harper slowly walked toward Rachel after she finished helping another customer. He thanked her for remaining patient despite an uncomfortable morning and acknowledged that first impressions sometimes became barriers to understanding. Rachel listened carefully before answering in her calm, steady voice. She explained that every public servant carried an opportunity to strengthen trust through fairness and consistency. Communities became stronger whenever people chose to understand one another before reaching conclusions. Harper nodded sincerely, recognizing that the lesson would remain with him long after the day's events faded into memory. Through the front windows, families gathered near the town square where volunteers arranged tables, greeted veterans, and welcomed neighbors from surrounding communities. Children waved small American flags while local musicians prepared for the afternoon program. The atmosphere reflected gratitude rather than spectacle. Rachel quietly excused herself to help carry donated food supplies outside, working beside volunteers without expecting special treatment. Watching her blend naturally into the crowd, Harper finally understood that true authority never demanded attention because it revealed itself through service. The woman behind the grocery counter had quietly taught an entire room that lasting respect was never created by position alone. It was earned through character practiced every day, especially when no one knew who you truly were. By early afternoon, the town square had become the heart of Maple Ridge. Families gathered beneath rows of small American flags, while volunteers arranged folding tables covered with donated food, school supplies, and information for veterans and their families. Carter's corner market remained open, but Rachel Carter quietly moved between the store and the event, carrying boxes, greeting neighbors, and making certain every guest felt welcome. Nothing about her behavior suggested that she expected special recognition after the extraordinary revelation inside the market. She preferred serving rather than being celebrated. Colonel Benjamin Hayes joined the volunteers, thanking local organizations for supporting military families and reminding everyone that communities became stronger when ordinary citizens chose compassion over convenience. Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Travis Cole remained nearby to assist with traffic and answer questions from visitors. Their responsibilities had not changed, Yet both officers approached the afternoon with noticeably greater humility than they had shown earlier. Harper found himself observing Rachel from a distance. She stopped to help an elderly veteran carry a folding chair, listened patiently as a young family thanked her for organizing the event, and encouraged local students to introduce themselves to former service members so they could hear stories of sacrifice and perseverance. Every conversation reflected the same quiet respect she had shown throughout the morning. She never mentioned her own military career unless someone asked directly, and even then she redirected the attention toward the people standing beside her. Harper gradually understood that genuine leadership often meant helping others become the focus instead of yourself. Later that afternoon, he approached Rachel while she organized donated groceries for several military families. He thanked her for the dignity she had shown during a difficult morning and admitted that he had allowed assumptions to influence his judgment before taking the time to understand the person standing in front of him. Rachel placed another box onto the table before meeting his eyes with the same calm expression she had carried all day. She explained that trust could be repaired only when honesty replaced pride, and every public servant possessed an opportunity to strengthen that trust through fairness, consistency, and respect. Her words carried no bitterness. They sounded like principles she had practiced for years rather than lessons created by a single day. Nearby, Colonel Hayes watched the exchange with quiet approval before reminding several young volunteers that uniforms, titles, and positions existed to serve communities rather than elevate individuals. As the afternoon continued, neighbors who had witnessed the morning's events noticed something subtle but meaningful. The atmosphere no longer revolved around conflict. Instead, it centered on cooperation. Police officers, veterans, volunteers, business owners, and local families worked side by side to welcome every guest. The tension that had filled the market only hours earlier slowly gave way to mutual respect built through sincere actions rather than dramatic speeches. As warm sunlight stretched across the town square, Harper realized that the greatest lesson of the day had never been about hidden authority. It had been about character remaining unchanged regardless of whether anyone recognized the remarkable life behind an ordinary smile. As the afternoon sun settled over Maple Ridge, the last visitors slowly made their way home carrying donated groceries, warm conversations, and a renewed appreciation for the quiet people who strengthened their community without ever asking for recognition. Volunteers folded tables, children chased one another across the grass, and veterans lingered beneath the shade of old oak trees, sharing stories that bridged generations. Rachel Carter remained exactly where she had spent most of the day, helping load the final supply boxes into waiting vehicles and thanking every volunteer before they left. Her military accomplishments no longer surprised anyone, yet she behaved no differently than she had before the truth became known. Colonel Benjamin Hayes watched with quiet admiration before walking beside her toward Carter's Corner Market. He remarked that many people spent their entire lives searching for influential leaders without realizing they had been buying groceries from one every weekend. Rachel smiled gently and answered that leadership meant very little unless it improved the lives of ordinary people. Titles eventually disappeared, uniforms were carefully folded away, but character remained long after every ceremony ended. Inside the market, Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Travis Cole waited near the register. Harper stepped forward with sincere humility and thanked Rachel for showing patience throughout a morning that had challenged many assumptions. He admitted that he had focused too much on appearances and not enough on understanding the person standing before him. Rachel listened without interruption before explaining that every community deserved public servants who judged situations with fairness, consistency, and respect. She believed mistakes became meaningful only when they inspired better choices afterward. Harper nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that the lesson would remain with him throughout the rest of his career. Cole quietly glanced toward the worn challenge coin resting beside the coffee grinder and smiled. Earlier that morning it had seemed like an ordinary keepsake. Now it represented years of sacrifice carried without pride or display. Rachel noticed his glance and simply returned the coin to its familiar place beside the wooden photograph. She never treated either object as trophies. They were reminders of responsibility rather than achievement. Outside, the final military vehicles departed without flashing lights or unnecessary ceremony, blending quietly into the evening traffic until they disappeared beyond the edge of town. The extraordinary day gradually returned to ordinary life. The coffee continued brewing. Shelves still needed restocking. Tomorrow's produce order waited beside the office door exactly where Rachel had left it before sunrise. Neighbors stopped by one last time to thank her for organizing another successful community event, and she accepted every compliment with the same modest smile before reminding them that many people had contributed to its success. As twilight settled across Maple Ridge, Harper paused before leaving the parking lot and looked once more toward the small neighborhood market. It appeared exactly as it always had, welcoming, peaceful, and unremarkable. Yet he now understood that remarkable people often chose ordinary places because service was never about being seen. It was about quietly making other lives better. Rachel locked the front door, turned off the lights one by one, and glanced briefly at the challenge coin before placing it beside the framed photograph exactly where it belonged. She switched off the final light and stepped into the cool evening air with the same quiet confidence that had guided her through every chapter of her life. The town would remember the unexpected revelation for years to come, but the lesson would last even longer. True authority never demanded attention. True strength never needed to announce itself. And the greatest leaders were often the ones who served with humility long before anyone discovered who they truly were.